It started with a growl, low, deliberate, and cold enough to freeze my blood. Ranger, my retired DEA K9, stood rigid at the end of the hallway, eyes fixed on the kitchen door. A faint creak echoed. Then came the smell, bitter, chemical, unnatural. I eased forward with my flashlight. The beam caught something moving, a figure in a pink bathrobe crouched by the counter, sprinkling white powder onto a slab of raw steak. For half a second, she didn't notice me. Then Ranger's growl deepened, that unmistakable warning from a trained killer who'd found his mark. The woman turned. Her face lit up in terror as Ranger advanced, teeth bared but controlled, every muscle coiled. Karen Jensen, the HOA president herself. She screamed, stumbled backward, knocking over a chair. The steak fell from her hands. Ranger barked once, sharp, commanding, and she panicked, bolting through the back door into the yard, tripping over her slippers as the motion lights burst to life. That's when I realized she wasn't just trespassing. She just tried to poison a federal K9. Before we get into what happened next, tell me where you're watching from and your local time, and don't forget to subscribe for more unbelievable HOA revenge stories. For the first time in years, I'd thought life had finally slowed down enough to breathe. After 2 decades working with the DEA's K9 division raids, sting ops, meth labs, and basements, I hung up my badge and bought a house on the edge of a peaceful suburb called Oakridge Estates. A quiet cul-de-sac lined with identical red brick houses, trimmed lawns, and people who waved when they wanted something and smiled when they didn't. It was supposed to be peace. Ranger loved it here too. He wasn't just any dog, he was my partner. A 6-year-old German shepherd with eyes that could read a man's heartbeat. After everything we'd been through, gunfire explosions, endless nights in motel rooms smelling like bleach, we'd earned this quiet. I built him a custom kennel out back big enough to make any HOA board twitch. He spent his mornings patrolling the fence line, and his afternoons stretched across the porch, his tail tapping like a metronome in the sun. And that's where Karen Jensen first met him. She appeared the way HOA presidents always do. Smile first, clipboard second, threat third. "You must be the new homeowner," she said that day, her perfume strong enough to sterilize a small country. "Lovely dog. Is he safe? Safer than most people?" I'd replied. Her smile faltered. She pointed at the service animal tag on his collar. "Well, we have community standards, Mr. Harris. Large dogs can be intimidating. Maybe keep him inside when residents are walking their smaller pets." I gave her the kind of nod that means sure and not a chance at the same time. Ranger, sensing my mood, just sat by my leg and yawned. That was day 1. Within a week, I received my first HOA letter. Violation, #47, unauthorized structure, K9 kennel, fine $250. 2 days later, another one arrived, this time about noise disturbance animal. I laughed so hard I nearly framed it. Ranger hadn't barked once. He didn't need to. But Karen wasn't the kind of woman who let things go. She ruled Oakridge Estates like a tiny pink-blazered dictator. Every shrub was regulation height. Every mailbox color approved by the committee, which of course was just her and her husband Gary. Gary Jensen was quieter, the kind of man who smiled too much and blinked too little. He ran a small trucking company, Jensen Logistics, out of a warehouse near the highway. Big white semis came and went at odd hours, which wasn't unusual until you noticed none of them had company logos. Still, I didn't pry. I was retired. My only mission now was morning coffee and not caring. But Ranger? He cared. He'd pace the fence whenever one of those trucks rumbled by, nose-high, ears twitching. Once he barked short, sharp, decisive when Gary parked a van too close to my driveway. Karen was outside in seconds, shouting, "Control that beast." I almost told her that Ranger had once sniffed out 5 kilos of heroin hidden inside a gas tank, but I figured that fun fact wouldn't make the next HOA meeting any smoother. As the weeks went by, the letters piled up. "Your porch light is too bright. Your trash cans are visible from the street. Your dog looks aggressive through the fence." Each one signed, "Warm regards, Karen Jensen, HOA president." Still, I kept my cool. I'd seen worse. The kind of patience you learn when undercover in a drug house for 3 days teaches you how to handle a Karen. Then came the day she held an HOA meeting in her driveway. Half the neighborhood showed up with folding chairs and lemonade. I watched from my porch as she projected photos of Ranger on a portable screen like he was a wanted criminal. "This animal," she declared, "poses a threat to our community's safety. We need to vote on removal or restrictions." I laughed out loud, and that earned me a dozen side eyes from neighbors who'd rather stay neutral than risk a fine. I walked over, calm coffee in hand. Ranger followed at heel, perfectly silent. "Karen," I said evenly, "Ranger's a retired federal K9. He's licensed, registered, and protected under federal service animal law. You can't just vote him out. Her jaw clenched. Then maybe we'll see what animal control has to say. She snapped her fingers at Gary, who nodded obediently. Behind them, Gary's younger brother Ethan leaned against a pickup, arms crossed. He had that restless energy, eyes darting jaw, grinding gum like it owed him money. I'd seen men like him before in interrogation rooms, the kind who talk tough but sweat easy. From that moment on, I felt Ranger's instincts sharpen. He started patrolling more frequently, ears flicking toward the Jensen property. Once he barked 3 times in the middle of the night, his alert code for chemical scent detected. When I went outside, I caught the faint smell of solvents drifting from their garage. Something wasn't right. A few days later, I found my backyard gate open. Not broken, unlatched. Ranger sat at the edge, staring toward the Jensen house, tail stiff hackles, slightly raised. Lying in the grass near him was a half-eaten hamburger patty. Ranger hadn't touched it. I bagged it, stored it in the freezer, and sent a sample to a vet friend of mine who still worked with law enforcement. The results came back the next afternoon, traces of ethylene glycol antifreeze, lethal to dogs. That was the moment I stopped laughing. From that point, I treated my home like a crime scene. I set up new cameras, thermal night vision, the kind that doesn't blink when someone cuts the power. I rigged motion sensors by the back door and replaced every lock. Ranger got an upgraded GPS collar with a built-in mic. When Karen saw me working in the yard, she smirked. "Paranoid, are we?" "Prepared," I said. She turned to walk away, but muttered just loud enough, "Some dogs just don't belong here." The next morning, I saw her talking to Ethan by their garage. She pointed at my house. He nodded and laughed. Gary stood nearby, arms folded, saying nothing. The 3 of them looked like they were planning a hoe bake sale if bake sales came with poison. By that evening, the smell returned, faint but distinct, chemical, metallic, bitter. Ranger caught it first, tail stiffening, nose tracing the air. He trotted to the kitchen door, low growl rumbling in his chest. I killed the lights and checked the monitors. Movement in the backyard. A pink silhouette creeping toward the porch. I couldn't believe it, she was actually doing it. Karen Jensen, in her ridiculous bathrobe and gloves, slipping through my yard with a flashlight between her teeth, holding something in a Ziploc bag. I hit record on every camera I had. Through the night vision lens, I watched her kneel, sprinkle white powder onto a raw steak, then open the door just enough to slide it inside. She whispered something. I couldn't hear it all, but it sounded like, "Let's see how smart you are, mutt." That's when Ranger moved. He didn't bark right away, he stalked. Shoulders, low steps, silent, the same way he'd approached cartel couriers back in the day. He sniffed the air, then emitted one low warning growl. The kind that doesn't just say, "I see you," it says, "I've already decided what happens next." Karen froze. She turned slowly, flashlight trembling. The beam landed on Ranger's face, his eyes gleaming like 2 pieces of amber under the porch light. She gasped, dropped the steak, and stumbled backward, hitting the kitchen counter. The sound jolted me out of hiding. I rushed in from the hall just as Ranger barked one single thunderous note that shattered the silence. Karen screamed, bolting for the door. Ranger followed, controlled and precise, driving her through the backyard until she tripped over the garden hose and landed flat on her back. He stopped inches from her teeth, bared chest heaving but never bit. Just held her there with that unspoken authority of a creature born to detect fear and guilt. By the time I reached them, she was shaking, eyes wide with panic. "Call him off, call him off." I stepped closer. "He already did," I said. Karen scrambled up, mud streaking her robe, and sprinted toward her house, screaming, "You'll regret this." But the only sound following her was Ranger's steady growl fading into the night. It would have been funny if it hadn't been so deadly serious, because I knew what I'd smelled, and I knew she hadn't acted alone. Somewhere behind those perfect red brick walls, something far uglier was hiding, and my dog had just sniffed the first trace of it. The next morning, Oakridge Estates looked like any other picture-perfect suburb. Sunlight poured over clean driveways and manicured lawns. Sprinklers hissed in rhythm, kids rode bikes past mailboxes approved by Karen's precious design committee. But behind the smiles, the neighborhood buzzed like a wasp's nest. Karen's midnight fiasco had spread faster than wildfire. Mrs. Henderson across the street had caught the whole scene on her Ring camera, Karen in her bathrobe, Ranger cornering her on the grass, me standing barefoot with a flashlight yelling into the phone. By sunrise, the footage was on every local Facebook group. The comments were brutal. HOA president caught trespassing. "Is this what our fees are paying for? That dog deserves a medal." Karen tried damage control immediately. By noon, she was back outside makeup on pretending she'd been checking on a gas leak. Her story changed 3 times before lunch. First, she said she thought she saw a burglar. Then she claimed she heard my dog crying. By the third version, she was suddenly the hero who prevented a fire hazard. It would have been laughable if she hadn't doubled down. That afternoon, I got another HOA letter slipped under my door. Violation, 70 due aggressive animal incident pending review. There was even a photo attached, Ranger's teeth bared mid-bark, taken straight from Mrs. Henderson's video, cropped to make him look feral. I just stared at it for a long time. Then I laughed. Ranger lay nearby, chewing calmly on his rope toy. "They're trying hard, buddy," I told him. He wagged his tail unconcerned. But I wasn't. I'd been in law enforcement too long to believe coincidences. Karen's hatred wasn't normal HOA pettiness anymore. It was desperation. And I still couldn't shake the smell from that night, the sharp industrial tang of something stronger than antifreeze. I walked the property line again, this time looking for footprints. There they were, faint, but clear, coming from the direction of the Jensen house, not the street. I followed them as far as the hedge before they disappeared into the dew. When I looked up, Gary Jensen was standing in his driveway pretending to wash his truck. Our eyes met. He gave a small, nervous wave. I didn't wave back. That evening, the HOA held an emergency meeting in Karen's garage. I wasn't invited, obviously, but I could hear every word through my open window. Her voice carried like a siren. Dangerous animal, community safety, potential lawsuit, public relations nightmare. Then Gary's deeper tone, "Just let it cool off, Karen." And a third voice, Ethan's low tense, almost a hiss, "If that dog keeps sniffing around, we've got bigger problems." That sentence stopped my breath, cold. Ranger lifted his head, ears twitching. He'd heard it too. The next morning, I paid a visit to my old partner in the county sheriff's office, Detective Laura Pike. Laura and I had worked cases together back in the day. She knew how to listen between the lines. I told her everything, Karen's trespass, the poison, the threats. She raised an eyebrow. "You think this goes beyond neighbor drama. I think that poison wasn't for noise complaints," I said. "And I think Gary's company, Jensen Logistics, is moving more than kitchen cabinets." Laura took notes, but she looked skeptical. "You got proof?" "Not yet," I admitted. "But I've got a nose that does," she smiled faintly. "Still trusting the dog more than the humans. Worked for 20 years, I said. That night I set up a new camera aimed directly at the Jensen garage. Ranger sat beside me as I tested the feed. Every few minutes he sniffed the air uneasy, around 1 a.m. A white van pulled into their driveway. 2 men, Gary and Ethan, loaded boxes from the garage into the back. No labels, no invoices, just plain cardboard sealed tight. Ranger gave a low whine, nose twitching. Whatever was in those boxes, he didn't like it. I recorded everything. The next day, Karen marched across my lawn like she owned the county. She was wearing sunglasses, lipstick, and the kind of false confidence that cracks under pressure. "You assaulted me last night," she declared. I blinked. "You mean the night you broke into my house and tried to poison my dog?" Her jaw tightened. "I was checking on your welfare. I heard barking. I crossed my arms. Funny, so did the police when I called them." She stepped closer, lowering her voice. "You think you're smarter than me, Michael, but this neighborhood runs because of me. That dog doesn't belong here. Either you control it or I'll make sure the county does." Ranger was lying on the porch behind me, silent, but his gaze tracked her every move. Karen noticed. She flinched and stepped back. "Good talk," I said. 2 hours later, animal control showed up at my door. Complaint filed anonymously. I handed them copies of Ranger's federal certification training records and the video of Karen breaking in. They left apologizing. By the next morning, Karen's car had been egged. The neighborhood was split in 2, half defending me, and Ranger half afraid of crossing her. HOA politics turned into Cold War. Meanwhile, I spent my nights reviewing footage frame by frame. In one video, Ethan carried a barrel marked corrosion hazard. Another showed Gary locking the garage door and wiping his hands with gloves stained gray. I sent the clips to Laura. An hour later, she called back. "You were right. That label belongs to a chemical used in drug manufacturing, pseudofrine extraction. They need solvents like that for cooking meth." I felt the weight settle in my stomach, so the poison, probably from their stock. Strong stuff. Enough to kill a horse. So Karen knew, or she found it and used it herself, Laura said. Either way, she's sitting on a bomb. That night, Oakridge didn't feel peaceful anymore. The streetlights flickered, the wind carried the faint reek of ammonia, and Ranger wouldn't stop pacing the yard. Every time he paused, his nose pointed at the Jensen garage. At 2 a.m., a crash shattered the quiet. Ranger barked once, then bolted toward the fence. I followed with my flashlight. Smoke was seeping from under the Jensen garage door. I called 911 while Ranger whined and scratched at the fence line. By the time the fire department arrived, Gary was outside, frantic, shouting that something exploded in the cleaner barrels. Karen stood beside him, shaking, mascara running. Ethan was nowhere to be seen. Laura showed up 10 minutes later in an unmarked car. She pulled me aside. "We're opening a full investigation. Whatever's in there, your dog just found probable cause." Ranger sat beside her, calm, now watching the flames. His nose twitched once more, and he let out a quiet huff, as if to say, "Told you so." The next morning, the Jensen's property was sealed off with yellow tape. Neighbors gathered in clusters, whispering about illegal chemicals and hazardous waste. Karen stayed inside, curtains drawn, HOA meetings temporarily postponed. I should have felt vindicated, but I didn't. Something still smelled wrong, literally. Ranger refused to go near our shared fence. He'd sniff, growl low, then back away. The scent wasn't gone. It had spread underground, faint but constant. When I told Laura, she frowned. "We'll need a warrant to dig deeper." Literally. "You'll have one," I said. "And Ranger will tell you where to start." That was the moment I realized this wasn't just an HOA feud anymore. It was a ticking bomb, sitting 3 doors down, disguised as suburban perfection. And the people trying hardest to silence my dog were the ones with the most to hide. 3 nights later, the air in Oakridge Estates felt wrong again too, still too clean, like the world was holding its breath. Ranger had been pacing since sunset. Every few minutes he'd stop by the back door, sniff, and stare toward the Jensen house. His instincts never lied. I'd spent the evening rewiring one of the motion cameras after the last storm. When I checked the footage from the previous night, something caught my eye, a small reflection near the hedge line, like a flashlight lens catching moonlight. I rewound. There it was again. A pink sleeve. Karen Jensen had been sneaking around my yard again. The footage showed her crouched near my fence, whispering something I couldn't make out. I watched her leave a small plastic bag by the gate, then hurry home. The timestamp said 11:42 p.m. She'd come back after the fire, after the police tape, after all her lies. It wasn't fear driving her anymore, it was obsession. By the next night, I decided I was done reacting. I was going to end this. I left the porch light on, angled the cameras to capture every approach, and waited. Ranger lay quietly beside me, head resting on his paws, eyes locked on the fence line. Midnight came, then 1. Then motion detected. There she was. Karen moved slower this time, cautious, dressed in dark sweatpants instead of her signature robe, but her hair, curled and sprayed like a helmet, still gave her away. She carried a Tupperware container and a flashlight wrapped in red cloth to dim the beam. She looked like someone about to bury evidence, not poison a dog. I hit record on every feed. She slipped through the gate, knelt by the porch, and pulled out a raw steak. Her hands shook as she poured a white powder over it. When she leaned forward, I saw her whisper something. No more barking, no more snooping. Then she opened the door. That was her mistake. Ranger was waiting. He didn't charge at first. He stepped out slowly, silent, until he was just behind her. One deep breath and his nose caught the scent. His ears went rigid. His tail froze. Then he growled, a sound so low it seemed to crawl up from the ground. Karen turned flashlight, trembling. The light hit Ranger's face, and she screamed a raw, high-pitched sound that shattered the quiet. "Get away," she shrieked, stumbling back into the counter. The Tupperware fell, scattering powder across the tiles. Ranger barked once, loud enough to shake the windows. He advanced, lips curled but precise, every muscle trained to intimidate, not destroy. "Call him off," Karen screamed, slipping on the spilled powder. "Call him off." I stepped from the hallway. "He already is." She gasped, eyes wide, as she realized she was cornered, me between her and the door. Ranger between her and her lies. I was checking for a leak," she stammered, backing into the wall. "You can't prove." Ranger took one slow step closer. She flinched so hard she fell to her knees. "I think the cameras will handle proof," I said. Karen scrambled up, slipping again, and bolted through the door, screaming as she tore across the yard. Ranger followed to the porch threshold, barking once more, sending her tripping face first into the wet grass. The porch lights from 3 neighboring houses flicked on. Curtains rustled. Phones came out. "Help, he attacked me," she yelled, clutching her arm, even though Ranger hadn't touched her. By the time the police arrived, half the block was awake. I showed them the footage, every second of her sneaking in, opening the door, spreading poison. The officers took one look and cuffed her on the spot. Karen cried and shouted as they led her away. He set me up, he's framing me, that animal's dangerous. One of the deputies looked at me and smirked. Sir, that animal just saved your life. Ranger sat calmly by my side, tongue lolling, tail thumping lightly on the porch. If he could have smiled, he would have. The investigation started immediately. The officers collected the spilled powder and steak as evidence. Even through the gloves, one of them muttered, "Smells like strychnine." When the paramedics checked Karen's arm, they found a small chemical burn, probably from the poison itself. The irony wasn't lost on anyone. By dawn, the entire neighborhood knew. The beloved HOA president had been caught breaking into a federal agent's house trying to kill his dog and getting bitten not by teeth, but by her own karma. But the story didn't end there. Later that morning, Detective Laura Pike pulled up in her unmarked SUV, coffee in one hand and a folder in the other. She looked tired, but when she saw Ranger sitting proudly on the porch, she smiled. "You weren't kidding about him," she said. "He's the best partner I've ever had," I replied. She crouched to scratch behind his ears. "Can I borrow him for a minute?" "Borrow him?" I raised an eyebrow. She stood flipping open her folder. Inside were lab reports. "The substance Karen used isn't your standard rat poison. It's lab-grade strychnine, same batch number as a shipment Jensen Logistics moved last month. My team's been tracking that company for possible chemical trafficking." I whistled softly. "So you think Gary's involved? I think your neighbor's HOA fees were the least of his side hustles," she said. "If we can tie the poison to their storage, we've got probable cause to search their property." Ranger perked up, tail wagging once. He knew that word, search. I gave a small grin. He'd be happy to help. An hour later, Laura and 2 deputies brought Karen still in cuffs to the station for questioning. Gary was called in for cooperation. He arrived pale and silent, his lawyer already on speed dial. When the deputies asked where the poison came from, he hesitated. "My brother sometimes stores cleaning chemicals in the warehouse," he said, avoiding eye contact. "Maybe she took it from there without permission." But his voice cracked on the word maybe. That night, the Jensen property was quieter than I'd ever heard it. No lights, no cars, no Karen yelling at neighbors about lawn lengths. Still, something in my gut told me this wasn't finished. Not yet. Ranger sat by the fence again, nose twitching toward their garage. He pawed the dirt once, whining softly. I knelt beside him and looked through the slats. Inside, under a faint bulb, I saw Ethan, the younger brother, moving boxes. Big ones, unmarked. "Laura," I whispered into the phone, "you might want to send a team tonight." She didn't ask questions. "I'm on my way." 15 minutes later, unmarked cars rolled quietly into Oakridge Estates. Flashlights swept the Jensen driveway. Ethan froze mid-step, then bolted out the side door. 2 deputies tackled him before he made it 10 feet. Ranger barked once, satisfied. Inside the garage, the officers found rows of barrels labeled corrosion hazard. Same chemical smell, same markings. Laura glanced at me. "Your neighbor's been sitting on enough precursors to make a small fortune and enough poison to kill a city block." I nodded. And to think she was worried about dog droppings on her lawn. Karen from her holding cell screamed denial. Gary demanded a lawyer. Ethan refused to talk, but the evidence was clear. The poison she'd used on Ranger wasn't from a store, it came straight from their operation. As dawn broke again over Oakridge, the Jensen's house stood surrounded by squad cars, reporters, and stunned neighbors, clutching their morning coffees. Ranger sat proudly on the porch as I watched the scene unfold. He looked at me, tail wagging softly, as if asking, "Did we do good?" I patted his head. "You did better than good, partner. You just opened a can of worms bigger than this whole HOA." What neither of us knew then was that the biggest twist, the real reason Karen risked everything, was still waiting to be uncovered. And it would hit like a storm no one in Oakridge could ever forget. By sunrise, Oakridge Estates looked like a crime drama set. Police tape crisscrossed the Jensen driveway, reporters camped out by the cul-de-sac entrance, and neighbors whispered behind curtains like extras in a soap opera. Karen sat in the back of a patrol car, face pale robe still stained from her late-night sprint through my yard. The irony was almost cinematic. The HOA president, queen of order, keeper of community standards, now wrapped in a scratchy police blanket, sobbing into her manicured hands. But beneath the chaos, something deeper was brewing. Detective Laura Pike stood beside me, sipping her 3rd coffee of the morning, scanning the property. "We'll charge her for trespassing, attempted animal poisoning, and possession of restricted chemicals," she said, "but I think she's just the tip of this rotten iceberg." "Gary and Ethan?" I asked. She nodded. "We've got a warrant for their warehouse. Your dog's about to get some exercise." Ranger's ears perked up at the word dog. He'd been pacing near the cruiser where Karen sat, watching her through the glass with unnerving calm. She caught his gaze once and screamed, "Get that monster away from me," Laura smirked. Funny how the people screaming about safety are usually the ones making everyone unsafe. The search of the Jensen house started mid-morning. The garage was already taped off from the previous night's chemical fire, but the basement Karen's self-proclaimed craft room was untouched. Inside, officers found a locked cabinet, a stack of HOA files, and several empty glass jars labeled sample cleaning solvent. Laura picked one up with a gloved hand. "Same brand used for meth extraction," she muttered. She must have had access through Gary's company. Meanwhile, Gary arrived home in his pickup truck, pretending to be shocked by the police presence. "What the hell is going on here?" he barked. Laura didn't blink. "Mr. Jensen, we have questions about the chemicals your company transported last month. Please step over here. I don't know anything about that." "My wife, she just got confused. She's on medication." Ranger growled quietly beside me, eyes fixed on Gary's boots. His nose twitched once, twice, then he let out a sharp bark. That was his signal scent detected. Gary froze. Laura raised an eyebrow. "Mr. Jensen, what kind of cleaning product are you wearing?" Gary stammered. Just degreaser. From the shop." But when the officers swabbed his hands, the field test lit up fluorescent green traces of pseudoephedrine residue, one of the primary ingredients in meth production. "Guess that cleaner does more than polish chrome," I said quietly. Gary was handcuffed on the spot. Karen watched from inside the cruiser, screaming, "Gary, tell them it was for the HOA. Tell them it was almost sad if she hadn't tried to kill my dog." Ethan, however, was still missing. His pickup had vanished sometime before dawn. Laura ordered a bolo be on the lookout, but I had a hunch he hadn't gone far. By noon, Ranger started whining again, nose pressed against the fence line separating my property from the Jensens. He pawed the dirt, then looked back at me, tail stiff. "What is it, boy?" I asked. He pawed again, this time harder, digging at a specific patch behind their tool shed. I called out to Laura. "He's got something." She waved a deputy over. Together we cleared the area and began to dig. Just 6 inches under the soil, the shovel hit metal. When we pulled it up, it wasn't a pipe, it was a buried ammo box. Inside were vacuum-sealed bags filled with white powder. Laura exhaled. "That's not fertilizer." They performed a quick test: methamphetamine, high purity. Street value 6 figures. "Jesus," I whispered. "They were cooking right under our noses." Laura looked at Ranger. "Or right under his." News traveled fast. By evening, the Jensen's home was swarming with DEA agents and hazmat teams. Oakridge Estates, once famous for its quiet suburban charm, had turned into the epicenter of a federal drug bust. I stood on my porch, arms crossed, watching the spectacle unfold. A camera crew tried to interview me, but I declined. I wasn't in it for fame. I just wanted my street back. That night, Laura stopped by my house. She looked exhausted, her hair pulled back, eyes rimmed red. She sank into one of my patio chairs and said, "We found a ledger in the Jensen office, coded entries, but we cracked them. Shipments, dates, drop points. Gary and Ethan were moving product across 3 states. And Karen, she probably didn't handle the deals, but she knew. She filed fake invoices through the HOA account, maintenance chemicals, community upkeep supplies. Clever cover." I shook my head. All that control, all that power, just to hide the rot underneath. Laura took a sip of the coffee I'd made her. "You know your dog's a better detective than half my team. Without his alert, we might never have gotten probable cause." I looked down at Ranger, lying at our feet, eyes half closed, still alert even in rest. "He doesn't miss much," I said. "Especially when something stinks." We both laughed quietly, but the truth of it hung heavy between us. Later, around midnight, the quiet returned to Oakridge, but it wasn't the peaceful kind. It was the kind that follows a storm when debris still glitters on the street. I sat on the porch watching the blue lights fade from the Jensen house. Ranger lay beside me, head on his paws, breathing slow. Every now and then, his nose twitched toward the east, toward the woods behind the subdivision. "You smell him, don't you?" I murmured. Ethan. Somewhere out there, the younger Jensen was still free. And if I knew anything about desperate men, it was that they always came back for what they thought was theirs. Sure enough, my phone buzzed 10 minutes later, Laura's number. "Michael, we just got a ping from Ethan's truck GPS. He's less than 2 miles out, heading your direction." I stood already, reaching for the flashlight and my sidearm. "You'd better hurry." "We're en route," she said. "Don't engage. Wouldn't dream of it." But Ranger was already standing, tail rigid, low growl building in his throat. His eyes locked on the tree line beyond the fence where a faint glimmer of headlights appeared. "He's coming back," I whispered. Ranger's ears flicked, and he gave that look, the one that said he didn't need backup, just permission. I nodded once. "Easy, partner. Let's finish what we started." The night swallowed us in silence, again broken only by the hum of an engine approaching slowly, cautiously like a predator circling its prey. By the time Laura's convoy reached Oakridge Estates, Ranger and I were already waiting by the gate, ready for the next chapter of the nightmare Karen's greed had unleashed. Because the truth was no longer hiding behind white fences and HOA newsletters. It was coming straight for us. And once again, my dog could smell it before anyone else. The first sound was the gravel, soft, deliberate, crunching under slow tires. Ranger's ears twitched before I even heard it. His body's stiffened nose pointed toward the gate. A pair of headlights crept into view, flicking off before reaching my driveway. For a few seconds there was silence. Then the faint creak of a door opening, followed by footsteps, heavy, cautious, moving along the fence line. "Ethan," I muttered. He hadn't fled the county. He'd circled back. Ranger let out a low growl that vibrated through the boards beneath my feet. I put a hand on his collar, signaling for silence. The moonlight caught a glint of metal Ethan's truck parked halfway behind the trees. He was alone, but armed. I could see the outline of a pistol at his side. He wasn't here for his brother. He was here for whatever was left behind. I crouched by the porch rail, flashlight off, safety off. Ranger's tail didn't move. His eyes burned steady toward the dark. Then a sound broke the quiet, the unmistakable clatter of a shovel hitting dirt. Ethan was digging right where Ranger had alerted earlier that day. I whispered, "Laura, he's here. Northwest fence. Alone." Her voice came back calm but urgent. "Units are 2 minutes out. Don't move." I smiled bitterly. He's the one moving. Through the fence gap I saw Ethan sweating even in the cold night air. He wiped his forehead, muttering to himself, "Come on, come on." Then the shovel hit something solid, a metallic thunk. He grinned, crouched, and started pulling something from the soil, another ammo box. That's when Ranger moved. He slipped from my grip and stalked forward, silent as a shadow. I followed, whispering, "Easy, boy, just watch." Ethan popped the lid open and froze. The box was empty. I'd already turned it over to the police earlier. He cursed, slammed it shut, and that's when Ranger growled, deep, steady, the kind of sound that says you're done running. Ethan spun around, gun half raised. "Get back," he shouted into the dark. I stepped out with the flashlight on, voice low and even. "Don't. You're outnumbered." "Where's my stuff?" he barked. "Gone," I said. "And so are your brother and sister-in-law." "You should have run farther." Ranger barked once, sharp, commanding. Ethan flinched. His gun hand trembled. Then came the sirens. Not loud, but close. He panicked, fired one wild shot into the air, then bolted toward his truck. Ranger lunged faster than thought, tackling him from behind. The gun flew into the grass. Ethan screamed, kicking, but Ranger's training was surgical, front paws pinning his chest, jaws clamped tight on his jacket sleeve, not flesh. By the time the deputies arrived, Ethan was face down in the dirt, arms out, babbling curses. Laura approached, flashlight in one hand, weapon holstered. "Nice to see you again, Mr. Jensen," she said. "This time we'll make sure you stay where you belong." Ranger released on my command, sitting back with a proud huff. Laura grinned at him. "If only all my arrests came with a K9 assist." Ethan glared up at me. "You think you're a hero, huh? That dog ruined everything I crossed my arms. No, you ruined it the second you brought poison into a neighborhood with kids and families." He just pointed his nose at the truth. Laura's team hauled Ethan away, and just like that, the Jensen's empire collapsed for good. But the story didn't end there, because what we found in the aftermath changed everything. The following morning, the DEA joined the scene officially. A mobile lab rolled into Oakridge, men in hazmat suits combing through the Jensen warehouse and the wooded area behind it. One of the agents, a grizzled man named Special Agent Ramirez, shook my hand. "Used to hear about you, Harris," he said. "You and that dog cleared half the Midwest meth corridor a few years back." "Trying to live quiet now," I said. He chuckled. "You picked the wrong neighborhood." Over the next few hours, they cataloged everything: precursor, chemicals, distribution logs, burner phones, fake invoices. Each find made the story worse. Turns out, Gary and Ethan had been using Jensen Logistics as a front for interstate trafficking, moving precursors under the guise of cleaning agents and paint solvents. Karen handled the HOA money as a way to launder small transactions enough to make her complicit, even if she never touched the product. When the DEA tested the poison she used on Ranger, they confirmed it was lab-grade strychnine, part of the same stockpile tied to their operation. Laura told me later that day, "If she hadn't panicked and broken into your house, we might never have found them. Your dog just cracked open a federal case by accident." I looked down at Ranger, who was busy dozing in the back of my truck, tongue hanging out. "Not an accident," I said. "He always knows who smells wrong." For the next few days, Oakridge Estates was on lockdown. Reporters parked up and down the street, neighbors peeked out from behind blinds, and the HOA office, the same one where Karen used to hold her reign of terror, was sealed with evidence tape. Someone spray-painted "No More Queen Karen" across the sign. I didn't laugh, not this time. Late that evening, Laura came by again. The air smelled of rain and ozone. She carried a folder under her arm and handed it to me. Inside was a photograph, Karen sitting in an interrogation room, eyes red, no makeup, clutching a paper cup. She cracked, Laura said softly. Told us everything. Why'd she do it, I asked. Laura sighed. She said she didn't know about the meth at first. Gary told her it was just cleaning solvent storage. But when Ranger started sniffing around, Ethan got paranoid. They were afraid your dog would pick up the scent and the DEA would get involved. So she tried to solve the problem permanently, I said. Laura nodded. Her words, if the dog's gone, the smell's gone. For a moment, neither of us spoke. The wind rustled the maple leaves along the street. Somewhere in the distance, thunder rolled. She's being transferred to county jail tonight, Laura added. Gary and Ethan are facing federal charges. This neighborhood's going to make headlines for a while. I stared at the folder. You think she'll ever get out? Probably. But she'll never get back what she lost. Ranger padded up beside us, tail wagging slowly. Laura knelt and scratched his head. You know, if you ever want to bring him in for demonstrations, my department would be lucky to have him. I smiled. He's retired. But maybe we'll visit. She grinned back. Good. I owe him a steak. Unpoisoned, of course. The storm hit around midnight. Heavy rain pounded the roof while I sat on the porch watching the yellow tape flutter next door. Ranger lay at my feet, his fur damp from an earlier patrol. Every so often, lightning flashed, illuminating the Jensen house, dark, silent, stripped of its power. It struck me then how thin the line is between control and collapse. Karen had spent years policing lawns and mailboxes, believing she ran this place. But one act of arrogance, a single moment of cruelty, had unraveled everything. Ranger lifted his head, looking toward the road, where Laura's car had disappeared hours before. He gave a quiet sigh, then rested his chin on my boot. We're done, partner, I told him softly. We did our job. But deep down, I knew there was still one final chapter left, one that would shake Oakridge Estates more than any of Karen's HOA fines ever could. Because in the days to come, when the dust settled and the headlines faded, the truth about why this neighborhood had been chosen for their operation would come out. And it wasn't random, it was personal. The rain didn't stop for 2 days. It soaked through Oakridge Estates, washing away the chalk outlines, the footprints, the gossip, but it couldn't wash away the stench of what the Jensens had built here. The smell of chemical residue still lingered near their garage, faint but unmistakable to the one creature who could never forget it, Ranger. By the third morning, the storm clouds broke, and sunlight returned like nothing had happened. Kids rode bikes again, sprinklers hissed, and someone even dared to mow their lawn as if pretending everything was back to normal could erase the truth. But for me and Ranger, it wasn't over. Not yet. Detective Laura Pike showed up early that morning. She looked different, sharper, more serious. Michael, she said as she stepped onto the porch, we need your help again. I gestured toward the chair across from me. You know you don't need to ask. She sat laying out several photographs. A map of Oakridge Estates, shipping manifests, warehouse diagrams. The DEA confirmed what we suspected. Jensen Logistics was just one node. Gary and Ethan were working for someone higher up, a supplier who used neighborhood delivery routes as cover. I frowned. You're telling me this entire suburb was a distribution point? Exactly. Quiet streets. Predictable schedules, no suspicion. Perfect for routing small chemical shipments through HOA-approved maintenance projects. Fertilizer, paint, thinner solvent. Nobody blinks twice. Ranger, lying between us, lifted his head and gave a soft growl, low questioning. Laura nodded toward him. He's right. They weren't just hiding chemicals, they were producing them. We found a hidden lab beneath the warehouse and a ledger mentioning one last delivery. The name on the invoice, she hesitated, was yours. I stared at her. Mine. She slid the photo over. It was a falsified delivery record from Oakridge Maintenance Committee dated 3 weeks ago. A shipment supposedly dropped off at my address, cleaning supplies for HOA inspection. That never happened, I said. I know, but it means someone was using your property ID to cover their trail. They knew you'd be the last person anyone would suspect, a former agent with a service dog. The thought made my skin crawl. So what are you saying? She met my eyes. I'm saying this isn't over. Someone inside the HOA helped move that last batch, and if I had to guess, they're going to want it back. By late afternoon, the sun hit the Jensen driveway, just right illuminating the yellow tape like a scar across the street. I noticed a car parked 2 houses down. One I didn't recognize, black sedan, tinted windows, idle engine. Too still for a delivery, too patient for a visitor. Ranger noticed too. His tail stiffened nose twitching. "Laura," I said, dialing fast. "You still in the area?" "I'm 5 minutes out." "Why?" "We've got company." Through the curtains, I watched 2 men step out of the sedan, both in dark clothes, sunglasses, despite the fading light. They moved with that same detached professionalism I'd seen 100 times, not thugs, not neighbors, but professionals. They weren't here for me. They were here to clean up a mess. One of them carried a small case, metallic heavy. The other scanned the street. They slipped under the Jensen property tape like they'd done it before. I whispered to Ranger, "Stay low." He crouched by the window silent. Every instinct in his body hummed with anticipation. I didn't wait. I grabbed my sidearm, stepped out the side door, and circled around through the yard. The mud was slick, the air thick with the smell of wet grass and ozone. From the garage, I heard faint clanging metal on metal, followed by a muffled curse. They were dismantling something. Evidence, maybe. Or something worse. Ranger moved ahead ghost-like. He slipped through the open gate without a sound. When I reached the garage door, I saw them, one kneeling beside a crate, prying it open, the other loading canisters into a duffel bag. Their jackets bore faint patches where logos had been torn off. I raised my gun. "Police are on their way. Step away from the chemicals." They turned instantly, and one of them smiled. "You're not police anymore, Harris." The sound of my name hit like a brick. "You know me. Everyone in the business knows you," the man said. "The dog, the raids, the busts. You should have stayed retired." Ranger growled, teeth-bared body lowering like a coiled spring. "Don't do it," I warned. The man holding the duffel pulled a pistol from his waistband. Ranger moved first. He lunged, clamping onto the man's arm with such force that the gun went flying. The other swung a crowbar, but I caught his wrist twisted and drove him back against the wall. The fight was fast, violent, desperate, adrenaline and training blending into instinct. Ranger yanked the first attacker down, snarling, refusing to let go. The man screamed, "Call him off." I kept my weapon trained on the second. "Drop it." He hesitated until red and blue lights flashed across the windows. Sirens roared down the street. Laura's voice boomed from outside. "Hands in the air, now." The 2 men froze. Within seconds they were surrounded, cuffed and dragged out by Laura's team. She looked at me out of breath but grinning. "You really don't do quiet retirement well, do you?" I holstered my gun. "He doesn't either," I said, nodding to Ranger, who sat proudly beside the subdued men, panting but uninjured. Laura opened the metal case they'd been carrying. Inside were several vials of liquid labeled with coded numbers and the word Batch Z12. "What is it?" I asked. "Liquid meth precursor," she said grimly. "Extremely pure. Street value about $3 million. So that was it, the final shipment. The one Karen's family had been trying to move before everything fell apart. And they'd come back for it, not realizing the man across the street used to dismantle people like them for a living. By nightfall, Oakridge was crawling with federal agents again. The sedan was towed, the chemicals confiscated, and the last of the Jensen's partners were in custody. But the biggest moment came just before midnight when Laura received a call from the county lab. She walked over, phone still in hand. "Michael, you'll want to hear this. The DNA on the case matches Ethan Jensen, meaning these 2 weren't outsiders. They were the Jensen's buyers. Ethan must have promised them the shipment before he got arrested. They came to collect, and you just stopped the entire pipeline." I let out a breath. I didn't realize I'd been holding. "Guess Ranger's nose just wrapped up a federal operation." Laura laughed. "Yeah, again." She looked down at him. "You know, if I ever get in trouble, remind me to just borrow this dog." Ranger wagged his tail, soaking in the attention like he understood every word. As the agents cleared out, Laura and I stood on the empty street, the neighborhood finally quiet again. The porch lights flickered back on one by one as if Oakridge was waking from a nightmare. "I'll file the paperwork tomorrow," Laura said, "but Harris, I've been doing this for 20 years. I've never seen something like this. One HOA feud unraveling a criminal network this deep. It's almost poetic." I smirked. "Yeah, karma has a wicked sense of humor." Ranger leaned against my leg, his eyes half closed. The adrenaline had worn off. Laura shook her head with a grin. "You 2 should write a book." "Nah," I said, looking up at the now clear night sky. "We'll stick to stories the neighborhood tells itself. They'll sound crazier that way." For a long moment we just stood there in the quiet, the scent of rain fading into fresh earth. And for the first time in months, I felt peace. Not the fragile kind I'd moved here to find, but the earned kind, the kind that comes after the storm passes and you realize you've survived it. Ranger yawned, stretching. "Come on, partner," I said. "Let's go home. We've got nothing left to sniff out tonight." But as we walked back toward the porch, Laura called after me. "Hey, Harris," I turned. She smiled faintly. "You were right the first night." She really did break into the wrong house, I chuckled. And he's the wrong dog to mess with. The next morning, Oakridge Estates finally exhaled. The HOA sign was taken down the Jensen's property, sealed for auction, and a local shelter fundraiser named their new campaign Ranger's Law, raising money to protect service dogs from abuse and harm. As the neighborhood rebuilt, I realized something simple: evil doesn't always wear ski masks or carry guns. Sometimes it wears a pink bathrobe, waves at you from across the fence, and signs its name under community president. But no matter how carefully people try to hide their poison, the truth always has a scent. And Ranger, he'll always find it first. A month passed before Oakridge Estates felt like a neighborhood again. The yellow tape was gone, the black sedan towed the cameras packed up, but the silence that followed wasn't the same quiet we'd known before. It was heavier, like the air was still trying to forget what had happened here. Still, life crept back in. The kids returned to their bikes. Mailboxes were repaired. And for the first time in years, no one was fined for having the wrong shade of green on their front door. The HOA had officially dissolved. Its once mighty president was now sitting in county jail, awaiting trial. Karen Jensen had pleaded guilty to trespassing and obstruction, but the state added conspiracy to commit felony concealment once the DEA confirmed she'd helped falsify HOA invoices for her husband's business. She wouldn't be getting out anytime soon. Gary and Ethan faced federal charges: manufacturing and distribution of controlled substances, possession of hazardous materials, and attempted tampering with federal evidence. Their bail hearing didn't go well. The judge, a retired Marine, looked at the photos of Ranger's injuries. Minor scratches, but dramatic enough, and said flatly, "Anyone who harms a service dog serves every day they're sentenced." Poetic justice, I thought. Meanwhile, Ranger had become something of a celebrity. Local papers ran headlines like "Hero K9 sniffs out suburban drug ring" and "HOA president's dog plot backfires." The county sheriff even awarded him a medal, an engraved tag that read, "For valor beyond the call of duty." He didn't seem to care. To him, it was just another walk in the park followed by free treats. As for me, I spent my mornings on the porch, same as always, drinking coffee and listening to the world come back to normal. But normal had a new meaning now. One Saturday, I found a small package on my doorstep, no return label, just a note taped to the top, for Ranger. "Thank you for keeping this place clean." Inside was a leather collar with silver lettering, "Ranger the Nose that saved Oakridge." It must have been from the neighbors. The same people who once crossed the street to avoid him now stopped by with smiles and baked goods. Mrs. Henderson, from across the street, who'd filmed Karen's breakdown, brought him fresh-baked dog biscuits every Sunday. Even the mailman started carrying jerky strips just for him. The neighborhood had changed. People were nicer, quieter, maybe because they'd realized how easily evil can bloom under the surface of perfection. Or maybe they were just grateful that their lawns weren't being inspected by someone in a pink blazer anymore. Detective Laura Pike stopped by, often partly to check in on the case, partly, I suspected, for the coffee. One afternoon, as she leaned against the porch rail, she said, "You know, this is the first time in years I've seen a community turn something this ugly into something good." I shrugged. People learned the hard way that control isn't the same as safety. She nodded. And that justice can come from the most unexpected places. Ranger wandered up, pressing his head into her hand. She scratched behind his ears. "You ever think about bringing him back for active duty?" I smiled. "He's earned his retirement, and I've earned mine." Laura laughed softly. "Fair enough. Just don't be surprised if the governor's office calls. There's talk about using his story for a statewide campaign raising awareness about service animals." "Let them," I said. "He's better at public relations than any of us." We both laughed, but deep down I knew there was truth in it. Ranger had done more to teach this town about decency than any law or HOA rule ever could. A week later, a letter arrived from the county courthouse. Karen Jensen had requested a meeting for closure she'd written. I didn't go, but I did read the transcript later. She'd told Laura that she didn't mean to hurt anyone, that she just wanted to protect her family. When the judge asked if she regretted it, she said, "I regret underestimating that dog." That line made the papers, of course. But I didn't feel triumph, just pity. For all her noise, all her rules, all her arrogance, she'd never understood that control built on fear always collapses, and she'd collapsed harder than anyone I'd ever seen. A few evenings later, I took Ranger down to the lake trail, the one that bordered the back end of Oakridge. The air smelled clean again. You could almost pretend nothing bad had ever happened here. He trotted ahead, tail wagging, stopping every few feet to sniff the ground. He still wore that new silver collar. It caught the last light of sunset, gleaming like a badge. When we reached the water, he sat beside me, watching the ripples. For a long time, neither of us said anything, him because he couldn't, me because I didn't need to. I thought about all the nights we'd spent together in darker places than this: warehouses, alleys, motel rooms, and how after all that, it wasn't the city or the crime that nearly broke us. It was a quiet neighborhood with HOA rules and painted fences. Funny how peace can be more dangerous than chaos when people hide behind it. Good job, buddy, I said, quietly scratching behind his ear. We're really done this time. He leaned into my hand, eyes half closed, content. A breeze swept across the lake, stirring the reeds, and for the first time since I'd moved here, Oakridge Estates truly felt peaceful, not because it was perfect, but because it was honest now. The masks were gone. As we walked back toward the house, the porch lights flickered on one by one. Neighbors waved, smiling, for real this time. Mrs. Henderson called out Evening Officer Harris. I laughed. Retired. Not to us, she shouted back. Ranger barked once, approving. When we reached home, I hung his medal above the mantel. Beneath it, I placed the old HOA. Regulation handbook. Karen had once mailed me, now torn and coffee-stained. I kept it not as a trophy, but as a reminder. Because the truth is, the story of Oakridge wasn't really about revenge or justice. It was about the difference between power and authority. Power controls people through fear. Authority earns respect through integrity. Karen never understood that, but Ranger did. He didn't need rules or titles. He just followed his instincts, and in the end, those instincts saved a neighborhood. A few weeks later, the county invited us to a ceremony. Kids lined up in front of the courthouse, holding tiny American flags. When the mayor pinned the medal on Ranger's collar, the crowd cheered. He just tilted his head, confused but happy for the attention. Afterward, Laura leaned over and said, "You know, Harris, every time people ask me how this all started, I tell them the same thing." "What's that?" I asked. She smiled. "It started with a dog who knew the difference between what smells right and what doesn't." That night, as I sat on the porch again, the moon hanging low over the rooftops, I realized something simple but true. Evil doesn't always come in the shape we expect. Sometimes it's quiet, polite, hiding behind neighborhood smiles and HOA newsletters. But so is good. It doesn't shout. It waits. It observes. It acts only when it must. Ranger shifted beside me, resting his head on my knee. "Yeah," I whispered, stroking his fur. "The world could use more noses like yours." The crickets started up again, the night settling soft and slow. And for the first time in a long while, I didn't feel like a retired agent guarding an empty house. I felt like a man who'd finally learned the difference between silence and peace. Because real peace isn't the absence of noise, it's the absence of lies. And Oakridge for the first time smelled clean. You know, folks, if there's one thing this story taught me, it's that loyalty doesn't just protect, it reveals. Ranger didn't save me because he was trained to. He saved me because he trusted me. And in a world full of masks and motives, that kind of trust is rare. Sometimes justice doesn't come from courts or badges. Sometimes it comes from doing what's right when no one's watching, when it's just you, a loyal friend, and the courage to stand your ground. So if you've got someone or something that's always had your back, take a moment tonight to appreciate them. Because you never know when loyalty might be the only thing standing between you and disaster. Now, before you go, drop a comment with where you're watching from, hit that subscribe button, and tell me this: what would your dog do if someone like Karen came sneaking into your house? Until next time, stay sharp, stay kind, and trust your God instincts.